The first time I saw that pavilion sitting on my family's land, I knew somebody had mistaken grief for weakness. It had stone columns, a cedar roof, polished grills, neat rows of picnic tables, and a little green sign that said Copper Ridge residents only, as if $100,000 worth of arrogance could somehow erase a property line. They figured I would call a lawyer, panic over the cost, and eventually sell them whatever strip of dirt they wanted. But by the time this was over, the first thing they heard coming through those trees was not a lawyer, it was a bulldozer. My name is Mason Reed, and all of this started with a phone call on a Wednesday morning while I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, staring at coffee that had already gone cold. The man on the other end was Daniel Crow, the attorney handling my uncle Everett's estate, and Daniel had one of those dry, papery voices that made every sentence sound like it had been stored in a filing cabinet for 30 years. He told me Everett had left me everything, 16 acres outside Fredericksburg, the old limestone house, the mineral rights, the equipment shed, all of it free and clear. I thanked him, hung up, and just stood there with the phone still in my hand, because hearing that somebody is gone and understanding that they're gone are two completely different things. Uncle Everett had spent his final 18 months in a veterans hospital in San Antonio, fighting lung cancer with the same stubbornness he used to fight everything else: weather, taxes, bad fencing, and anybody who tried to tell him what to do. He never married, never had kids, and he treated that land like family because, in a way, it was. My grandfather taught him to shoot there. Everett taught me to drive a stick shift there, and every spring he let the wildflowers grow so tall you could barely see the fence posts. He used to say land did not belong to people. People just borrowed it from the dead and kept it safe for the living. I had laughed at that when I was 20. Standing in my kitchen at 42, I finally understood what he meant. I drove out the next morning before sunrise in my old blue Ram, taking the back roads through the hills while the sky turned purple behind the cedar trees. Usually that drive settled me down, but the second I turned onto Everett's gravel lane, something felt wrong. The chain on the gate was hanging loose. Not cut, just unhooked. Like somebody had been using the place often enough to stop pretending they were sneaking in. Then I saw the tire ruts, deep, fresh grooves pressed into the damp soil along the southern edge of the property. Everett had not driven in over a year, and these were not pickup tracks anyway. They were wide and heavy, the kind left by cement trucks or grading machines. I parked, grabbed the deed and a flashlight from behind the seat, then followed the damage through the brush. Whoever had come through there had knocked down saplings, crushed a patch of blue bonnets, and carved a clean path toward the back boundary. About 60 yards in, the trees opened up, and I stopped so fast my boots slid in the dirt. There it was, a full outdoor pavilion sitting in a clearing that had not existed the last time I visited. Fresh concrete, stone columns, a cedar roof, stainless steel appliances, flower beds, ceiling fans, even decorative string lights hanging from the rafters. It looked like something out of a resort brochure, except it was sitting on my uncle's land without one word of permission. The sign near the entrance read Copper Ridge Community Pavilion, residents and guests only. Copper Ridge was the new subdivision next door, a collection of oversized houses with tiny yards and matching mailboxes. The kind of place where every garage door was the same shade of beige and somebody probably held a meeting if your trash can stayed out past noon. I pulled out my phone, opened the county parcel map, and checked my location. I work commercial construction, so I know enough about surveys to know when something is badly wrong. The blue dot showing my position was not near the line. It was well inside Everett's parcel. I paced it out twice, checked the old fence remnants, then found one of the original iron pins half buried under leaves. The pavilion sat nearly 14 feet onto our side, and the walkway leading to it crossed even farther. You did not accidentally pour a slab that size on the wrong property. Somebody had measured, planned, ordered materials, brought in crews, and decided the owner would never come back. I took pictures of everything, then called the number printed at the bottom of the sign. A woman answered with a bright, polished voice and said, "Copper Ridge Association. This is Marlene. How can I help improve your community today?" I told her my name, told her I had inherited Everett Reed's property, and told her I was standing in front of a building I had never authorized. There was a pause, but not the kind people make when they are surprised. It was the pause of someone changing strategies. "Oh, Mr. Reed," she said, softening her tone in a way that somehow made it more insulting. We were wondering when the estate would be settled. Your uncle gave the association permission years ago. Verbal permission, of course, but he loved the idea of families enjoying the land. I looked at the bright new lumber and the wet edge of a flower bed where somebody had watered that morning. My uncle had been too weak to leave a hospital bed for 18 months, I said. That roof looks like it was finished last week, so unless Everett approved it through a morphine drip, you are lying to me. Her sweetness disappeared instantly. She said the property had been neglected. The area was basically abandoned, and Copper Ridge had invested significant money improving an unusable section of land. Then she actually told me I should be grateful because the pavilion had increased my property value. I said, Marlene, you have 10 days to remove every board, every stone, and every inch of concrete, or I will remove it myself. She laughed, short and cold. Mr. Reed, that structure cost over $120,000. If you touch it, our attorneys will bury you. We have resources you do not. I looked around at the columns, the grills, the neat little flower beds planted over Everett's wildflowers, and felt something inside me go completely still. Then you better tell your attorneys to bring shovels, I said. She hung up on me. That night I sat at my dining table with the deed, old tax records, aerial photographs, and a bottle of bourbon I never opened. The more I studied it, the clearer it became. Marlene was not confident because she thought she was right. She was confident because she thought I was alone. She was counting on grief, money, and exhaustion to do her work for her. The next morning, I called Silas Boone, an old property lawyer with an office above a feed store in town, and after listening to the whole story, he leaned back in his chair and said, "They did not build that pavilion by mistake, Mason. They built it because they believe you will sell before you fight." Then he looked over his glasses and added, "And people like Marlene do not like being told no. So get ready, because the pavilion is only the first thing she's going to put on your land." Silas sent a formal demand letter that afternoon. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. The kind of letter that does not raise its voice because it does not need to. It gave Copper Ridge 10 days to remove the pavilion, restore the land, and stop entering the property. And it included copies of the deed, the county plat, and photographs of the original survey markers. Silas told me the law was on my side, but he also warned me that people who build entire buildings on land they do not own are not usually interested in behaving reasonably once somebody catches them. He was right about that, too. 2 days later, a county environmental inspector showed up at the gate with a clipboard and a complaint about raw sewage leaking into a seasonal creek. There was no septic system anywhere near that side of the property, but the complaint was written in enough detail that he had to walk the land, take pictures, and file a report. The next morning, I found 8 black trash bags dumped beside the road, split open by animals, diapers, beer cans, spoiled food, and enough fast food wrappers to feed a football team. Before I could finish loading them into my truck, a code enforcement officer pulled up and asked why I was illegally dumping household waste on agricultural land. The timing was almost impressive. Then came the anonymous calls. Smoke complaints when there had been no fire. Noise complaints on days I had not been there. Accusations that I was storing hazardous materials because I had 3 cans of diesel in a locked shed. None of it held up, but every complaint cost me time. Every inspection meant another morning away from work, and every letter carried that same message underneath the official language. This can stop whenever you decide to give us what we want. I started sleeping badly, not because I thought they would win, but because I could feel them trying to turn Uncle Everett's land into something poisonous in my mind. That was the real strategy. They wanted every trip out there to feel like another bill, another accusation, another problem, until I stopped seeing the oak trees and started seeing only paperwork. One evening, I sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the sun go down behind the pavilion roof, and for the first time I understood how people get bullied out of things they legally own. It is rarely one giant threat. It is 1,000 small cuts, all delivered by people who smile while they hold the knife. I was about to leave when I noticed a brown envelope tucked behind the wooden gatepost, hidden between the hinge and the brace. There was no stamp, no name, just a strip of silver tape holding it in place. Inside was a cheap flash drive and a folded note that said, "She has done this before. Do not use your home computer." That got my attention. I drove into town and used an old public computer at the library, sitting in the far corner where the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects. The drive contained 4 folders. The first held photographs of Copper Ridge board meetings, invoices, and internal maps. The second was a spreadsheet titled Southern Expansion Opportunities. Everett's parcel was highlighted in yellow, and beside it were the words, Acquisition through pressure. Owner absent, low resistance expected. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Low resistance expected. That was how they saw him. A dying old man in a hospital bed. Not a veteran, not a neighbor, not a human being. Just an obstacle with weak defenses. The third folder contained emails between Marlene and a local survey technician named Travis Heller. In one message, Marlene asked how difficult it would be to shift an online parcel boundary far enough to make the pavilion appear legal. Travis replied that the county GIS was only informational and could not override a recorded deed. Marlene wrote back, I know that, but most people do not. We only need enough uncertainty to force a settlement. The fourth folder had a video. It was shaky, probably recorded from a phone lying inside a handbag, but the audio was clear. Marlene stood in the HOA office beside a young employee I recognized from the subdivision gatehouse. She pointed at a map on a computer screen and said, Move the line south and submit it as a correction. The employee told her that would be falsifying a public record. Marlene answered, The owner is dying, and his nephew is a contractor with a truck payment. He will complain. Then he will take the money. When the employee still hesitated, she leaned closer and said, You are not paid to develop a conscience. Owen, you are paid to follow instructions. I watched the clip 3 times. The first time I felt sick. The second time I felt angry. By the third, I felt calm. And that scared me a little because calm is what comes when anger has finally found a direction. I took the drive straight to Silas. He watched the video without saying a word, then removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge up his nose. Well, he said, that just upgraded your trespassing case into something that comes with handcuffs. I asked whether we could use it. He said we could, but only if we verified the source, preserved the files correctly, and built the rest of the case so solidly that Marlene could not dismiss it as a disgruntled employee's revenge. He contacted the district attorney, arranged for a forensic copy of the drive, and hired a private investigator to locate Owen. Then he told me we needed an independent boundary survey from somebody nobody in Copper Ridge could buy. Pressure or charm. That somebody was Vernon Pike, a 70-year-old surveyor who wore the same faded canvas hat every day and carried field books older than most of the houses in the subdivision. Vernon did not trust phone maps, online overlays, or anyone who used the phrase close enough. He spent nearly 4 hours on the property locating iron pins, measuring from recorded benchmarks, comparing the modern plat with a 1936 county survey, and muttering under his breath whenever he found a fence that had been placed for convenience instead of accuracy. Finally, he drove a bright orange stake into the ground beside one of the pavilion's stone columns. Here's your line, he said. I asked how far the structure crossed it. Vernon took out a tape, measured again, and said, 14 feet, 3 inches at the kitchen corner, 17 feet at the walkway, and not 1 inch of it belongs to Copper Ridge. I asked whether he would testify. He looked at me like I had asked whether gravity worked and said, Son, I would testify against my own mother if she moved a boundary marker. By the end of that week, we had the deed, the recorded plat, Vernon's survey, the internal spreadsheet, the emails, the video, and a sworn statement from Owen confirming Marlene had ordered him to submit a false correction request. Owen was 23 and scared out of his mind. He had taken the job because his mother lived in Copper Ridge and needed help with the mortgage. Marlene had threatened to fire him and fine his mother for invented violations if he refused. He told us the pavilion was only the beginning. The board planned to use the same method on 2 other neighboring parcels. Create confusion, bury the owners in complaints, then offer low-cash settlements for strips of land they wanted for trails and amenities. Silas wanted to file everything at once. Fraud claims, trespass, conspiracy, malicious interference, and a request for emergency relief. I agreed, but I told him I did not want to spend 3 years paying lawyers while Marlene held beatings and called herself a victim. I wanted the structure gone before she could turn delay into another weapon. Silas studied me for a moment, then said there might be a faster route. Because the pavilion had been built knowingly on private land, after proper notice and without any valid agreement, we could ask a judge for a declaratory order confirming my right to remove it. He warned me the judge would want absolute proof and a chance for the HOA to respond. They told him to set the hearing. Copper Ridge responded by calling an emergency community meeting and sending every resident a letter describing me as an unstable outsider threatening to destroy a cherished family space. They included photographs of children eating birthday cake beneath a cedar roof and elderly couples sitting near the flower beds. It was clever, I will give them that. They had stolen the land, then filled the building with innocent people so anyone who challenged them would look cruel. The meeting was held on a Thursday night in the Copper Ridge clubhouse. Silas advised me not to go, but I told him I was tired of hearing Marlene speak about me in rooms where I was not allowed to answer. I walked in just after 7, still wearing work boots and a dusty canvas jacket, while Marlene stood at the front beside a projector screen showing a picture of the pavilion at sunset. She was talking about community heritage, shared values, and protecting families from intimidation. When she saw me, she stopped mid-sentence. The room went quiet enough to hear the projector fan. She said, "Mr. Reed, this is a private association meeting." I said, "I will only take a minute." Then I walked down the center aisle, placed Vernon's stamped survey on the table in front of her, and laid a second flash drive beside it. Marlene looked at the survey first, then at the drive, and I watched the confidence leave her face one careful inch at a time. I told the room the pavilion sat more than 14 feet inside my boundary. I told them their president had ordered an employee to falsify county mapping records, and I told them the original video, emails, D-1, and financial documents had already been delivered to the district attorney. Somebody near the back whispered, "Is that true?" Marlene grabbed the microphone and said the documents were fabricated. I looked at her and said, "Then you will enjoy explaining that under oath." She called me a liar. I told her the judge had scheduled an emergency hearing for the next morning, and if the order came through, the pavilion would be removed at sunrise the following day. The room erupted, people shouting questions, board members arguing with one another, and Marlene pounding the microphone, trying to regain control. I leaned closer to her and said quietly, "You thought grief made me weak. All it did was make me patient." Then I walked out, and behind me, Copper Ridge finally started asking the one question Marlene had spent months preventing them from asking. What else had she lied about? The judge signed the order at 4:27 the next afternoon. Silas called me from the courthouse steps and said, "You have legal authority to remove the structure. But Mason, do this clean. Do this carefully, and do not give them one unnecessary thing to use against you." I told him I understood. Then I called my friend Leon Briggs, who everyone in 3 counties called Bear because he was built like a grain silo and laughed like one falling over. Bear owned an excavation company and had a yellow D6 bulldozer he cared for better than most people care for their children. I asked whether he was available at sunrise. He said, "Depends. What are we moving?" I said, "A very expensive misunderstanding." He laughed and said, "I will bring coffee." I reached Everett's gate at 5:30 the next morning, and Bear was already there with the dozer chained to a lowboy trailer, white diesel smoke curling into the cold air. Dawn had barely touched the hills, and everything felt strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a place right before somebody's bad decisions become permanent. I handed Bear a copy of the court order, the survey, and the demolition plan. He read the first page, looked toward the tree line, and said, "So they really built the whole thing on your land?" I said, "Every shiny inch of it." He shook his head. "That is not competence, brother. That is a medical condition." We unloaded the machine, and the steel tracks hit the gravel with a heavy clank that rolled through the trees. As we came around the bend, I saw them waiting. Marlene stood directly in front of the pavilion in a beige pantsuit and high heels, which was a bold fashion choice for a muddy field at dawn. Behind her were 9 board members and maybe a dozen residents, some holding handmade signs, others filming with their phones. Marlene had arranged the board members in a line with their arms linked, as though they were protecting a hospital instead of an illegal outdoor kitchen. The second she saw the bulldozer, she raised both hands and screamed, "Stop that machine." Bear eased off the throttle, and the dozer settled into a low mechanical growl. I climbed down and walked toward them with the court order in my hand. Marlene pointed at me and said, "You are committing criminal destruction of community property." I said, "No, I am removing abandoned material from private land under a judge's order." And I held the paper out. She refused to take it. She said the order was fraudulent, the survey was fraudulent, Owen was unstable, and the entire county government had been manipulated by me and Silas. It was an impressive collection of accusations for 6 in the morning. One board member, a retired dentist named Howard Bell, stepped forward and asked to see the order. Marlene spun around and told him not to touch it. That was the moment the line began to crack. Howard looked at her, then at me, and said, "Marlene, you told us the pavilion was on association property." She snapped, "It is, legally and morally." Howard said, "Those are not the same word." A few residents lowered their signs. I walked closer and said, "Everyone has 5 minutes to clear the area. Take any personal items you own. Chairs, coolers, decorations, whatever belongs to you. The structure stays." Marlene planted her feet and said she would not move. Bear leaned out of the cab and shouted, "Ma'am, I am not running over anybody today, but I would appreciate it if you did not make me put that in writing." Nobody laughed except one teenager standing near the back, and even he tried to hide it. Marlene's face tightened. She said, "We will sue you for everything you have." I said, "You already tried to steal what I had. That is why we are standing here." Then Bear lowered the blade. The steel hit the ground with a deep metallic clang, and the vibration traveled through the dirt like thunder. Marlene flinched. One heel sank into the mud, and when she tried to step backward, the heel snapped clean off. She windmilled both arms, grabbed Howard's sleeve, missed, and landed hard on one knee in a patch of wet clay. The human chain dissolved instantly. People scattered to the sides, dragging Marlene with them while she shouted that she had been assaulted by heavy equipment. Once the path was clear, I looked at Bear and nodded. He pushed the throttle forward. Black smoke rolled from the stack, the tracks bit into the earth, and the machine moved toward the pavilion with slow, unstoppable weight. The blade struck the first stone column, and for half a second nothing happened. Then mortar burst outward. The column folded, and the cedar roof dropped on one side with a crack like a rifle shot. People gasped. Bear reversed, angled the blade, and hit the outdoor kitchen. Stainless steel twisted, cabinet doors flew open, and one expensive grill rolled across the slab before disappearing under a pile of timber. Marlene screamed over the engine, calling us vandals, criminals, animals, but nobody stepped forward to stop us. 15 minutes later, the pavilion was no longer a community asset, a heritage site, or a symbol of anything. It was a pile of broken lumber, bent metal, and shattered stones hitting exactly where it had never belonged. When Bear shut down the engine, the silence came back slowly. Dust drifted through the morning light, and I could see the old oak trees behind the wreckage for the first time. I'd thought about Everett lying in that hospital, trusting the land would still be there when he was gone. I did not feel triumphant exactly. I felt relieved, like I had finally returned something that had been taken from him before he could defend it. Then the sheriff's cruisers arrived. Marlene ran toward them covered in mud, waving one broken shoe and yelling, "Arrest him. He destroyed our pavilion. He threatened us. He tried to kill me." Deputy Carla Wynn stepped out, looked at the rubble, then looked at me. I handed her the order in Vernon's survey. She read both while Marlene continued shouting. Finally, Carla said, "Miss Kessler, did your association build this structure on Mr. Reed's parcel?" Marlene said, "The boundary is disputed." Carla said, "Not according to this order." Marlene started to argue, but a second deputy walked up carrying a folder. He quietly handed it to Carla. She opened it, read the first page, then turned toward Marlene. Her voice changed, not louder, just official. "Marlene Kessler, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of tampering with public records, filing fraudulent documents, conspiracy to commit theft of real property, and retaliation against a witness." Marlene stopped moving. It was like somebody had unplugged her. The anger drained out of her face, leaving only confusion and fear. She looked at the board members and said, "Tell them this is a mistake." Nobody answered. Carla placed her hands behind her back and cuffed her while the residents stood in complete silence. The only sound was the soft click of metal and a bird calling somewhere beyond the fence. Copper Ridge's lawsuit against me was dismissed 2 weeks later. The judge ordered the association to cover demolition cleanup, survey costs, and my legal fees, and their insurance carrier eventually settled my counterclaim for trespass, harassment, and malicious prosecution. Owen received whistleblower protection and found a better job with the county planning office. Howard Bell became interim board president and opened every financial record Marlene had kept hidden. What they found led to 3 more investigations and a special assessment that made the residents finally understand the real cost of looking the other way. Marlene pleaded guilty to reduced charges, avoided prison, and was permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. A month later, Bear came back and helped me clear the rubble. We planted bluebonnets where the slab had been and built a simple cedar bench beneath Everett's favorite oak. At the property line, I installed a steel sign facing Copper Ridge that read, "Private property, no pavilion, no shortcuts, no exceptions." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "In memory of the most expensive picnic area in county history." Some neighbors laughed when they read it. Some looked embarrassed. A few came over, apologized, and admitted they had believed Marlene because believing her had been easier than asking questions. I spend more time out there now, usually near sunset, when the hills turn orange and the wind moves through the cedar branches. Sometimes I think I was too harsh. Other times I remember the spreadsheet that called my uncle low resistance. And I know mercy means something different when the other person is still reaching for what belongs to you. So tell me what you think. Did I go too far by bringing in the bulldozer, or did Marlene get exactly the ending she built for herself? Leave your opinion in the comments. Share this story with somebody who thinks property lines are only suggestions. And subscribe if you believe justice sometimes arrives wearing work boots and running on diesel.